We've talked about how entering content into a table is just like entering it anywhere else in Word. The same is true for formatting tables. The content can be formatted using any of the tools with which we're familiar. The entire set of formatting tools from the ribbon or the quick formatting bar are at our disposal. If we insert images into our tables, which we can do using the insert command, their formatting tools likewise apply. Well, there has to be a reason then that we have this lesson on formatting tables then, right? Well, of course there are. There are a couple of features that are specific to tables, and a couple that are not specific to tables, but we just haven't mentioned them anywhere else in the series, so we want to make sure that we do them here. Let's start, though, with what makes a table a table. That would be rows and columns, or something otherwise known as the table grid. One of the tricks to using tables for layout, but not having them seem like tables, is to remove the border. I've mentioned that a couple of times. We need to mention, though, that borders are not the same as grid lines. Borders can be applied to cells or to selections of cells. They can be on the top, the bottom, the left, or the right, and they can be of varying thicknesses and styles, just like you may be familiar with the drawing tools for creating lines. It's important to make a selection before we apply borders. I've gone ahead and moved down in our document to the section that has to do with our market potential, the table that we've been working with a lot. It happens to be on page 9. I've also turned off the navigation pane just to kind of keep things cleaned up. Now what we want to do is we want to select the table itself. We know that we can do that by pausing over the table, then moving to that upper left-hand corner and clicking the indicator that selects the entire table. Up to this point, we've been doing a majority of our work from the Contextual tab for Table Layout. Now we actually want to go to the Design tab, so we'll give that a click. And over near the right-hand side, we can see that on this tab there is an entire group for drawing borders. We can choose the line styles, the thicknesses, the pen colors, and so forth. But just to the left of that, under Table Styles, there is also a button specifically for borders. This is the one I like to start with because it's easier. Don't do everything by hand if you can kind of do them all at once. If we click on this drop-down, we will see that certain features are lit up. As a matter of fact, almost all of them are right now. This particular table, by default, has a bottom border, top border, left, right, all, and outside, as well as inside borders. So there's a lot of stuff going on. We simply want to turn all of this off, so we're going to do that by clicking No Border. And you can see now how all of those lines that make this look like a table are gone. This makes it really very clean. But in some ways it also can make it very difficult to read. So sometimes we do want to remove all of the borders, but other times we don't. Let's go ahead and work a little bit more with this table to make it look exactly the way that we want. In order to do so, especially if we're not familiar with our options, it may help to display that borders drop down one more time. What exactly do we want to see here? Well, what's difficult, especially when you have multiple lines of text, is keeping the rows straight. One of the options that we have is to actually put an inside horizontal border. In other words, a border between each of the rows. Something like that. Now let's go ahead and select just our top row. Now you can see the challenge here. Without our lines, it gets to be a little bit more complicated. How can we see where we need to click? We'll talk about that in just a second. But let's say we want this top row, which are our labels, to be a little bit different. We'll go ahead and choose the drop-down for borders, and this time let's choose an outside border. That's an outside border around the entire row. If you look carefully, this looks fairly stylized, but because we only chose the inside borders, notice that below our gross profit for You Got It doesn't have a border at all. So instead of doing this the way we have been, maybe we should select the whole table, go back to borders, and put an outside border around the whole table. Let's just deselect so we can see that. That looks a little bit cleaner. Now in short, all we did is we removed the vertical borders. But we could have done that a different way. There's 2 to 3 different ways you can do everything. When you work with borders, typically you have to practice a little bit to figure out which order things should be done in. This was just one of our choices. If you wanted to do something a little bit more unique, you first make your selection, use the borders drop-down, but instead of using the predefined options, come all the way down to the bottom and choose borders and shading. Here we can choose different things like colors as well as thicknesses. Now you probably don't want to mix and match the colors too much, so we'll leave that as automatic, but maybe we want to make the bottom border below our labels a little bit thicker. Let's choose 2 1/4 point. Once you get the color and the width and possibly even the style from up above selected, then you can move to the right-hand side and simply click what it is that you want to modify. In other words, we want to apply this to the bottom of our selection, so we will click at the bottom of the selection, and visually we can see that this is going to give it a thicker border. While we're here, I also want to talk about something else that's similar to borders, except it actually has to do with the fill, and it's called shading. By clicking on the Shading tab, we can actually add some shading to what is our top row or our header row. This is just going to help differentiate a little bit. First, we'll start by choosing a color. If you so desire, you can then choose a style, including making different gradients. In other words, it doesn't have to be that dark. Let's go ahead and choose, for example, 20%. However, if you're going to do that, remember that the percentage here, or the style, applies to a color that you choose under patterns, not necessarily the one that you did as a solid fill. Let's go ahead and turn off the top option, say no color. And then for our pattern, let's do 20% of our blue. Next at the bottom, we can determine if we want to apply this to different aspects. Depending on what we have selected, because this doesn't just work with tables, it works throughout the document, we can apply it to a text, the entire paragraph, a cell, or a table. Let's go ahead and choose cell, because even though we have multiple cells selected, it will apply it to all of the selected cells. Let's say OK. Let's click off to deselect. And now you can see this pattern that we have. Because we selected 20% blue as part of the pattern, it made a blue pattern. If we wanted to have a blue fill, we would have needed to work more with the colors on the very first or top selection. Now, there's not any right or wrong way to do this. Using the pattern makes it kind of nice because it's not solid, it's not going to use up a lot of ink or toner, but it's subtle. It does still differentiate, which is exactly what we wanted. We may choose, however, at this point to go ahead and select that again, go to the Home tab, and just as my personal preference, I like to make labels bold. Now that's looking a little bit better. If all we want to work with is the fill, there's actually a faster way to do it. Let's select our last row, which is gross profit. And from the paragraph option, which is on our Home tab, we do have a little tipping paint can, which is our fill color as well. Here, let's go ahead and choose our blue, but this time we can choose a gradient of a solid color by simply choosing one of the color swatches. If we wanted to work with borders, they are available from here as well. So in this case, we can work with the formatting of tables from a couple of different places. Now, I'm not sure if you particularly like this layout, but you get the idea of what we can do with design using border and fill colors, either from the contextual tabs or from the Home tab. We actually started off our discussion talking about the difference between borders and grid lines. And so far, we've only talked about borders and shading, but not grid lines. We started off in our Design tab. Let's go ahead and move back to our Layout tab, because the Layout tab is where, on the far left, we get to see the option to view grid lines. And I'm simply going to toggle this on or off so you can see it. Remember, we removed all the vertical lines? Those are vertical borders. Borders are what show up both on screen and when we print. Grid lines are only visible on screen. They do not print. So if we're having difficulty seeing where rows and columns are because we've removed borders, we can choose to leave the grid lines on. And in this case, with it enabled, we can see the vertical bars again. That's going to help us select a little bit easier. Remember, grid lines do not print, borders print. So you can kind of play with these as is necessary or appropriate to allow you to both work with the document yourself as a designer, as well as to make it usable when you print it or when other people work with it on screen. Now, we've done all of this work manually, and there's nothing wrong with that. But remember, one of the huge features of Office 2010 is that there are all of these wonderful galleries. If we go back to the Design contextual tab for our table, we actually have an entire gallery that we can take a look at. If we wanted to apply something quickly, we could simply select it, click on it, and it's done. Everything else that we had already done is gone. So it's easy to initially format things this way, or to maybe fix things if you've been messing around with them. Let's go ahead and undo, though. Put our formatting back. And I wanted to remind you that just like we had with our regular styles, When we work with table styles, if we right-click on one of our thumbnails, we have a couple of options. Just clicking on it is the same as choosing Apply and clear any formatting that's already there. But by right-clicking, we can also apply but maintain any custom formatting that we've done. So that's kind of the best of both worlds. If we spend a lot of time customizing this, though, and we have it using kind of our branding and our colors, and we really like the work that we've done, don't forget that another option we have is the last of our styles. We have character styles, paragraph styles, list styles, and don't forget we also have table styles. Let's go ahead and give New Table Style a click, which opens a dialog. We're going to call this You Got It Table. Notice that it automatically defaults to a table style. It's based on the normal table style. Just like we have a normal text style, there's a normal table style as well. One word of caution, and that is to take the time when you're actually working through table styles to be sure that all of the features you want have been defined. If we look at the Apply Formatting To section, we can see it currently says Entire Table, but that will be just some of the very general settings. In order to capture everything we want, we'd use the drop-down and select each of the table components that we want to format, and then designate the formatting for those particular components. We don't have to do all of them, but the ones that are relevant for our style do need to be configured. We've already gone through the basic process of creating styles with other kinds of styles in our previous chapters. We've also already talked about how to apply formatting to specific sections of a table in this chapter. Table styles is just a combination of the two, so we won't do it all again here, but we can still save this as a simple table style so we can at least see how it's added to the gallery. So we'll go ahead and tell Word to store it locally in this document, then click OK. Now we have our own table style that we can reuse throughout this document. Don't believe me? Well, let's go ahead and check it out. Let's display our table style gallery and look at the very top where it says Custom, and if we pause over it, we get the little tooltip with our name that says, this is a You Got It table. That's exactly what we wanted to happen. It's often at about this point in training that some start to feel overwhelmed. What I like about this point in Word training is that this is where we get to remind ourselves that this stuff isn't new. We're beginning to see that we use the same basic techniques just in different ways. Early on, we learned how to format text manually. Then we learned we could save it as a style. Then we learned about lists, a variation on text and paragraph styles. But we can also save those as styles that are appropriate for tables. Once again, there are just a few unique features, but the overall methods are still the same. So now, in addition to knowing how to make the regular content in our documents look nice, we also know how to do some